the crafting DM.
Greetings, Earthlings! Welcome back to another edition of
Dollar Store Chop Shop.
In this episode of the Dollar Store Chop Shop, we're going to convert some caterpillar toys into some tasty tentacles for your dungeon. These are Happy Halloween creepy creatures from the 99-cent store. I was looking for a while to find something to make tentacles out of until I stumbled upon these. For the mouth or focal point of this creature, I used a Final Faction Karn weapons pack, Quake Arms. The pack came with 3 bits, so I saved the rest for some future projects. I find that toys with a lot of texture and detail like these tend to make better conversions. Plus, I was really digging the insectoid alien vibe, as I wanted this creature to be pretty creepy looking. To begin this project, I first assembled the room out of pieces cast from Herstart's molds. Specifically, the molds used to obtain the pieces for this project are numbers 40, 203, and 273. This video isn't about casting, so if you want to learn about that process, go ahead and just search around on YouTube. There are about 1,000 videos on that. The official Herstart's channel is a great place to start. Using Aleen's tacky glue, glued the pieces down to a 1-inch XPS foam base, cut into a square with a Proxxon hot wire cutting table. You don't have to be precise in your placement, there's a lot of working time with this glue. After I had the pieces where I wanted, I straightened everything out using a few makeshift L-shaped tools made out of Legos. This method is great for getting nice straight right angles for your walls and floors. I didn't come up with this technique, I found this somewhere on YouTube. I repeated this process for all of the floor tiles and the walls. The open area in the middle was left bare in order to have room for the tentacle creature and resin pool to come later. This room is built to line up with all of my other modular dungeon rooms. I'm a firm believer in building modular terrain to maximize its utility. I make all of my hallways and rooms with the same specs so they align, and I paint them with all the same color palette so they blend nicely. I will die on a modular hill someday. Each room has a centered 2-inch opening for hallways and doorways. Also, each room is mounted on a 1-inch XPS foam base. To add varying levels to the dungeon, I mount some rooms on a 2-inch foam base and connect them with stairs. As a result, all of the rooms connect together to create what seems like endless combinations of dungeons. The foam base also provides some height on the table. This gives your overall dungeon a classy, artistic appearance. When creating a dungeon room that involves poured resin, it's okay to use some excess glue. This will allow it to seep in all the cracks and seal it up nicely so you don't get resin leak later on. That's also why it's important to use the Lego L-shaped blocks in order to straighten out all of your pieces. This prevents any large gaps that resin could flow in. Once I had the room glued together, I prepped up the caterpillars. I wanted them to be bent in a more snake-like shape, so that they looked more like tentacles and less recognizable as caterpillars. To do this, I submerged them into boiling water in order to soften the rubbery plastic. Once I had them in the shape that I wanted, I held the shape in place with kitchen tongs and dipped them in an ice bath to allow them to quickly cool and keep their new shape. Next, using a pair of clippers, I separated the piece that I wanted to be the creature's mouth from the rest of this toy. Each caterpillar was inconveniently marked with the word China. The word was raised, so it couldn't just be painted over, and it was on the end that would ultimately be sticking up out of the ooze. To fix this, I filed off the word with an Army Painter model file. Next, I aligned all of the larval Lepidoptera tentacles and alien mouthpiece onto the foam and drilled holes for their placement. To seal the area in preparation for the resin, I lined the perimeter with the same Aleen's tacky glue. I also used this glue to hold the creature parts in place. The glue job did not need to be perfect, because the entire area would be filled with resin, which would eventually cure and hold everything firmly in place. There just needed to be enough glue to to hold all of the caterpillars upright while I poured the resin, and also to prevent any toys from possibly floating around once the resin was poured. Once everything was glued down, I primed the tentacle creature with Army Painter's matte black spray primer. I'm not sure exactly why I did this first, I just did. I think I was just excited to splash some paint on the creature, which was the focal point of this project. Either way, it worked out just fine in the end. Next, I based the tentacles in purple using Citadel's Nagaroth Night. I am not an expert painter, so if you're looking for a how-to on painting tentacles, there are definitely better videos out there. This is just how I painted my project, and in the end, I was pretty happy with the results. After the purple base coat, I used a cheap $1 makeup brush from the dollar store to brush on a coat of iris purple. After I had applied some basic purple coloring to the central creature, I turned my attention to the dungeon room itself. To begin, I primed the entire room using Apple Barrel's black. When painting stone casts, I watered down the black paint a bit to allow it to flow into all of the nooks and crannies. Often this takes several coats. It's important to let it dry in between so that you can see where more paint is needed to cover up any white areas that might show through. It's important to take your time with this so that the shading and highlights of your stonework turn out well later on. After a thorough priming in black, I applied a base layer of pewter gray. If you watch any of my other videos or check out any of my stuff on Instagram, I always use this color scheme so that my pieces blend together. Up next is a dry highlighting with granite gray. If you're going less for a cold, dark dungeon, and more instead for a warm, sandy look, light mocha is always a good option. I tend to use granite gray on the fieldstone tiles and walls, and light mocha on my cavern pieces. I also use granite gray for Gothic tiles like this. That way they fit together nice with any fieldstone tiles in a modular sense. The pipework on the floor is painted with a base layer of antique brass metallic paint and is highlighted with Citadel's Canoptic alloy. I also made a hallway piece with similar piping on the floor as a clue for players as to what lies ahead, deeper within the dungeon. Maybe an intelligence check could reveal some important details about this place. For the underside of the tentacles, I wanted a more fleshy pink color. To achieve this, I mixed some game color bloody red and pale flesh together. Next, I used Citadel's shade Druchii Violet. I gave it a healthy coating. If you're an amateur painter like me, you can use shade and dry brushing as a crutch. I certainly do. I rely on these techniques heavily and it always seems to work out. Using Citadel's Kislev flesh, I placed some color on the suction cup nodes of the tentacle arms. I wanted to accent the purple color of the tentacles with some flesh tones to make it a little bit more creepy. I used Citadel's Deepkin flesh to throw down a base layer of color for the creature's teeth. Using Citadel's Deathworld Forest, I accented the bumps and spots on the tentacle arms. The caterpillars that I used for these tentacles already had some detailing that looked just like some weird aquatic bumps once they were all painted up. It worked out really well. To highlight the entire creature, I dry brushed on a coat of Citadel's Eldar flesh. This really brought out all the fine details. After the dry brushing, I touched up the suction cup suckers with some more pale flesh color. To highlight the teeth, I used Citadel's Corax White. Once I was satisfied with the paint job, I began thinking about the resin pour. I am using Easy Cast Clear Casting Epoxy. I'll drop a link in the description below. You can get this stuff for fairly cheap on Amazon. It works great for creating water effects for your dungeon rooms. It takes color really well, and it cures nice and fast. I was going for a dark ooze, so I used some light green and black acrylic ink to dye the resin. For this project, I actually wanted a small amount of bubbling. To achieve this result, I microwaved the resin for a few seconds prior to pouring to overheat it a bit. If you want to see another example of how I use this resin, check out my water effects video. Once the resin was cured, I was finished with the room and very pleased with the way it turned out. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.